And why else did you get into being a comedian?
I don't know. I got talked into doing it. No, I wasn't really very funny.
Most of us know Joe Rogan as the world's biggest podcaster, a title he's held for over a decade, and others will know him for his UFC commentary or for hosting Fear Factor. He even appeared in a couple of 90s sitcoms, Hardball and NewsRadio. But by far his biggest passion is stand-up comedy.
Well, you must have been funny.
Well, I was only funny because it was like gallows humor. We would go to compete, or we would be about to spar, and I would be the guy who would make everybody laugh. Because everybody was so nervous, because it was scary. You beat the shit out of each other, you know?
Martial arts is the last place you'd think would be a breeding ground for a comedian, but somehow his quirky personality combined with some odd circumstances led him to become one of the most successful comedians in history.
You were fighting, and then your pal talked you into becoming
my
a
friend
stand-up comic.
Steve Graham, two of my friends, Ed Shorter and Steve Graham, grabbed me by my shoulders and said, you should be a comedian.
So then what happened?
I went to an open mic night. I watched amateurs try it, and that's how I got into stand-up.
And so way back in the late 80s, Rogan the comedian was born, and he's still going. He even recently opened his own comedy club in Austin, Texas, called the Comedy Mothership, where all the best comedians perform, except for Brendan Shaw, but that's another story. Just to give you some background though on Rogan as a comedian, his shows often sell out quickly and he co-headlines with the likes of Dave Chappelle. More on him a little bit later. So however you look at it, Rogan's an elite comedian. He's at the very top of that food chain. But hang on a second. Here's the thing. Joe Rogan isn't funny. Now, before you jump into the comments and profess your undying love for him because you saw his stand-up once and laughed, understand that he's my favorite podcaster. I'm a huge fan, and I actually think he's a genuinely funny guy. Confused? Let me explain. In general conversation, when he's on his podcast, for example, some of his off-the-cuff remarks and observations, even storytelling, is pretty funny.
You're in the water. This is nice, dude. What is that? It's a log. It's moving.
Terrifying stories I read was about these kayakers in the Congo. And they were going down this river in the kayak in front. The guy saw the crocodile come up, tip the kayak over, and then the kayak bounces a few times as the croc pulls the guy out of the kayak, and then the kayak just drifts off, and then there's no croc, and there's no guy, and there's another guy behind him.
Where do you go, bro? Then there was the guy.
Have you seen this documentary, The Most Hated Man on the Internet?
No. Who is the most hated man on the internet?
His name is Hunter Moore. I don't know.
Brendan Schaub just went like this.
I remember this guy.
I don't even want to get caught in these crosshairs. I don't even want to be close to this. Damn it. There wasn't... I literally...
Whew, that was close.
You can't deny that he's got an infectious laugh, and when he's on with the right people, he can be a pretty funny guy. But don't forget how rich and powerful he is. His net worth is estimated to be in the hundreds of millions, and his reach through JRE is somewhere in the tens of millions. Those are massive numbers. And sometimes it's hard to tell when people are laughing because he's funny or because they feel like they have to.
Most people avoid them at all costs, but if you fuck up and you're too close to a moose, they'll come for you. They're different. They're different than any other wild animal because they deal with wolves. So they're like real good at stomping. Real good at just stomping the fucking shit out of things. That's what they have to do. If you want to stay alive, if you're a moose, you gotta stomp the kind of everything near you. So if you're talking to a moose in a parking lot in Anchorage, Alaska, if you're talking to a moose in a parking lot in Anchorage, Alaska, you might get stomped to death.
Yeah.
That's real.
That's not Will Smith, bro. That's not a little slap. That's a stomp.
They stomp.
That's a Mr. Miyagi right there.
They're 1,800 pounds when they're the giant bulls. Yeah. I might have made that up.
100% correct.
Oh man, there's too much going on there to even begin to break it down. Go check out some of my other videos on Schultzy and his boy band if you're interested, but that clip was actually the closest I've seen Rogan's general conversation get to his stand-up comedy. He's full of energy, he uses physical comedy, facial expressions, he does voices, he gets loud. It's like he's almost forcing you to laugh. For me, that's where he starts to fall apart as the funny guy.
Sup? How we doing? You having fun? Having a rough week, man. I've been hearing the M word too much from my girlfriend, you know what I'm talking about? She brings up marriage a little bit too much, and it's, I can't even hear that word. I hear the word marriage, my brain just shuts off. It's like, marriage, click! Every word after marriage is, I don't think so. I'm like, that's like a contract. I signed this. I can't have sex with other girls for the rest of my life. And I gotta buy you a ring.
And Scientology is a wonderful religion. Not just because it was written by a science fiction author who wrote more fake shit than anyone that's ever walked the face of the earth. And not by a small amount. This dude never made a second draft in his life. Everything was one draft of nonsense. And he wrote more of it than anybody. Not in his neighborhood, not in his state, not in a year, not in a decade. More than anyone that's ever lived, ever. And Scientology is still like, I don't see any red flags. I think we're good. I think this is legit as fuck.
Bimbos are good to date sometimes because they're low maintenance. You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, if you date intelligent women, they ask tough questions and you got to give them real answers, right? You know, bimbos ask like real easy ones. You can tell them anything. You know, like, what are you thinking about? Corn. Really? What kind of corn? The kind you put on your door for Thanksgiving, but you never eat? Oh my God, you're really deep, huh?
There's nothing wrong with joining a cult. I think you gotta just join a nice, friendly one. Like, the Mormons are a good cult. Here's why. They don't get mad at anybody. Like, they never kill anybody. Like, here's a perfect example. Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the guys who created South Park, they made a hilarious musical called The Book of Mormon. It's fantastic. If you haven't seen it, it's so f***ing hilarious. But it's also brutal about the Mormons. You know what the Mormons did? They went to see it, and they took out a full-page ad in the playbill that said, if you enjoy this musical and you want to find out more about being a Mormon, please visit our website. They just took it right on the chin like champs. They didn't get mad. They didn't get defensive. They didn't kill anybody. That's a good cult.
In case you're wondering why he wears oversized clothes during his stand-up routines, it's because he doesn't want his jacked physique to be a distraction from his jacked personality. So then, while I was putting this video together, I didn't plan on going much further than this. I thought I'd show you guys a couple of examples of Rogan being funny on his podcasts, then we'd look at some of his stand-up, and that would be the end of it. He's a funny guy in conversation, but his stand-up is forced and overridden with boring, unfunny observations. He's famous for his podcast, Fear Factor, and UFC commentary, so people buy tickets to his shows just to see him as a celebrity, and he headlines with some of the best comedians in the world. There you have it, case closed. But I wasn't quite satisfied with that. Some of you might be thinking, yeah, whatever, nothing new here, move on, and I'd probably agree with you. Then I thought, if Rogan's so bad at stand-up, who's good at stand-up and what makes them so good compared to Rogan? Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K., and Bill Burr are three of my favorite comedians, and I went down a bit of a rabbit hole trying to understand what makes them so good at what they do, and funnily enough, I found something that might just explain it.
It's such a wild process.
Yeah.
The beginning to the end. When you write, do you sit in front of a computer, like specifically trying to come up with material?
Never did it.
Really?
I never wrote jokes, ever.
Do you write ideas? Or do you just write bullet points?
I write it down like one word. Zoo lions.
Yeah.
And I avoid thinking about it. I don't want to work it out. I just write down zoo lions, and I know that it's in the ether. I know the general feeling. And I wait till I'm on stage that night, and I explain it to them. and the audience is there as a target.
Yeah.
I record every set, and I listen to them. And I work on paper, but it's kind of like research. I listen to the set, and I write notes.
Okay, so Louis C.K. lets the jokes sort of come to him in a way. He doesn't sit down and write them out and workshop them on paper or on the computer. He'll make a note of a few words and work it out with an audience, and then afterwards, if it worked out, he'll get it down so he can remember it and add it to his routine. It's strange because when he breaks it down like that, it actually makes a lot of sense. So then what about Dave Chappelle? How does he come up with his stand-up material?
Yeah, he does that a lot, where he'll just drop in a place and just do a set, and that's how he kind of works his material out. You know, he just kind of drops in and keeps tweaking it, and it's if he has a structure, right? Like if he has a few ideas that he's talking about, he can just riff, and especially if he's drinking, just go on stage and then he's always got dudes behind him that are taking down notes, letting him know like, oh, you talked about this, yeah, and I'm sure they record it too. Then he'll go over it and eventually boil it down to like what that Netflix special was.
Wow, that sounds like Dave Chappelle for sure. He's so effortless. He kind of rolls with an idea and sees where it goes, and if it sticks, he'll do what Louis C.K. does and get it down so he can add it to his routine, and the good stuff makes its way into a comedy special. Isn't it funny how two of my favorite comedians have a very similar creative process? But what about Bill Burr? His style of stand-up seems a lot more polished and tight, right?
But you're always writing new stuff. You always have new material.
I don't write.
You don't write?
I don't. I just do it on stage. It doesn't work for me. And I'm lazy.
You're always coming up with new ideas, though, on stage and incorporating them in. And what's the process? You say it on stage?
I riff.
Okay.
I riff.
Okay, let me just say, I fully appreciate if some of you watching don't care about this and think it's just a lot of fluffy stuff, but for me, making this video, doing all this research and trying to understand their different creative processes, this was kind of mind-blowing for me. This was huge. I'd never stopped to consider how these guys come up with all their material and workshop it to get to the final product. And I'll tell you what, that sounds like pretty hard work. I mean, it almost sounds like torture. Imagine going up in front of an audience with an idea in your head, a few key words and a basic structure, and just seeing what you can come up with on the spot. That's impressive. So with all of that in mind, what about Rogan? How does he put everything together?
So there's 3 stages.
Okay.
There's the Microsoft Word stage, which is basically just free form, free association, writing things down. There's no structure to it. Sometimes it comes out like a bit. Sometimes it's just nonsense that never goes anywhere.
That you needed to get out anyway, so you could get to other stuff.
Yeah, it's
like
just
purging.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you need it, but it's like there's a road that you get onto. And as you're on that road, all of a sudden you're like, oh, look, I found a bag of gold. What the writing does, it allows you to pick up these little bags of gold along the way. And then I take these little bags of gold and I pile them up, and then I throw them into the fortress. And the fortress is like Scrivener. So then I can move those bits around. And
What does Scrivener do? Like, what is it? How is it different than Microsoft Word?
Well, the reason why it's different is because it's set up in columns, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you see how, and it also has cork boards. See, Jamie's got it up on the big screen. So I could write down on these index cards, like, don't forget this, or this is important here, or this tagline is huge. Try switching this around. And it's just this constant.
But are you already like this? Are you already this kind of an organized person? Have you always been this way, or did you get really?
No, this is a discipline.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Rogan's process is completely different to those other guys, and for me it goes a long way to explaining why he's so average when you compare them together. But it's not that simple. I think there's a little bit more to it than just that. Think about Jerry Seinfeld, for example. His process is very similar to Rogan's. He does a lot of writing, a lot of structuring, edits everything on paper, and then when it's polished, he'll take it to an audience. And you can't deny that Jerry's a successful comedian. I think when it comes to the general population, Jerry's probably more recognizable as a comedian than any of those other guys, purely because of his show Seinfeld, where he played himself a stand-up comedian. Now, I personally wouldn't put Jerry in the same league as Dave Chappelle, Louis C.K. or Bill Burr, but he's definitely a better comic than Rogan is. I mean, that's not hard, right? But the point is, you don't have to be a free spirit type of comedian to be a good one. You can engineer jokes and write them out, edit them, etc., and come up with good material. I think when it comes to those elite guys, they well and truly have the comedy brain. And that's something that Rogan talks about a lot on his podcast with some of his hack comedian buddies. Basically, they think their brain works in a different way compared to us pedestrians, and that allows them to be funnier than us and come up with groundbreakingly funny comedy. Except it's not. But having now seen how those guys at the top come up with their material, ironically, I agree with Rogan about the whole comedy brain thing. I just don't think he's describing himself. Here's Rogan talking about Dave Chappelle.
That shows you how prolific that dude is. To put out a Netflix special and then a year later put out 2 Netflix specials.
Right.
And then Netflix is like, we'll take it. What do you got? He's like, hey, I wrote this one this month and I'd like to put it down for all eternity. Are you cool with that? Most people, like, you write something and it's a good solid year before you even consider putting it in a special. You know, some guys were doing like a special a year, but too much of it was like half cooked. It's like, if you just waited 6 more months, this thing would be like an all-time great special. But instead you're banging them out one a year. You never get the essence of the thing.
Well, his thing too, part of his thing, I think, is making it look like it's so easy.
Effortless.
Because the night at the Comedy Store, and it did feel like he was just sort of making the shit up on the spot. And then you see the Netflix specials, and it sort of feels the same way.
That's right. He's got that comedy brain, or whatever you want to call it. Chappelle doesn't need to write it out and work on it for months and years. It's just natural to him. That's why when he performs, it feels like a natural conversation, not a performance. Anyway, this was a cool video to make. I really enjoyed it. I'll try to make more of this style of mini documentary videos for you guys where I take a break from trashing celebrity podcasters and do a deep dive into something related like this. Let me know what you guys think, drop a comment below and I'll pin the best one. Hit the like button and become a subscriber so you get my uploads in your feed, and I'll chat to you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.
Oh, yeah, gone ballistic.
That's what the moose does. The male moose, the bull.
Okay. You gotta go. Hands up, hands up.